Question 5 on the Massachusetts ballot calls for an increase to the minimum wage for tipped workers. Right now, the law says tipped workers must make at least $6.75 an hour. That's lower than the state's general minimum wage of $15. Tipped workers are expected to ultimately make at least $15 an hour through tips. Otherwise, their employers are supposed to make up the difference. If Massachusetts voters decide to pass this ballot measure, the minimum wage for tipped workers would increase to $15 an hour, and tips would be extra on top of that. This increase wouldn't happen overnight, though. The minimum wage for tipped workers would gradually rise every year from 2025 to 2029 until it matches the general minimum wage. Until 2029, employers would still be obligated to make up the difference between the rising tipped minimum wage floors and the regular minimum wage. If an employer wants to pay their tipped workers at least the state minimum, the proposed law would allow them to pool and distribute tips among other workers like dishwashers or line cooks. A group of national labor advocates called One Fair Wage is behind the ballot measure. The organization argues service workers want and should make a livable wage with tips on top. The advocates say the current setup keeps workers at an economic disadvantage and prevents restaurants and other businesses from retaining staff. Meanwhile, the Massachusetts Restaurant Association opposes the ballot measure. The group represents 2,000 food and beverage operators across the state. The association says the ballot measure will hurt the food and hospitality industries and is being pushed by out-of-state activists. The organization cites a survey it conducted of tipped workers that shows 91% of respondents prefer the current system and 88% oppose pooling tips. If the ballot measure passes, Massachusetts would join 7 other states that require one minimum wage for tipped and non-tipped employees. A yes vote would increase the minimum hourly wage an employer must pay a tipped worker to the full state minimum wage, implemented over 5 years, at which point employers could pool all tips and distribute them to all non-management workers. A no vote would make no change in the law governing tip pooling or the minimum wage for tipped workers. For 90.9 WBUR, I'm Zaninjor and Wameka.